Hi everyone. We're going to read the next section of Ratscalibur by Josh Lieb. This is for the Gilbert Library's winter reading, and once we're finished reading it, if you want to read it again, you can come inside and check it out. Here we go. Chapter 29. Everything looked the same in Squirrelin's acorn room, but everything was different. Before, Squirrelin had only looked scary. Now Joey knew that he had every reason to be scared of him. "I trust you had a pleasant rest," said the ancient wizard as they entered. "Yes," said Percifer, "it really helped clear our heads." "Squirrelin," said Yasleen, stepping forward, "I was too sleepy to thank you properly earlier, so let me say thank you now, for your hospitality and more. In this time of crisis, it is truly a blessing that my father and his kingdom have a friend like you." "That is unnecessary, my dear," said Squirrelin, staring at her. "On the contrary, it is very necessary," said Yasleen, staring back. Was she trying to fool Squirrelin into thinking she didn't know the truth, or just make him feel guilty for betraying them? Joey wasn't sure. Maybe Yasleen wasn't sure herself. After a few seconds, Squirrelin said, "Well, you're very welcome. And now, I've decided on the best way to proceed. First, I need the two High Realmers to come closer." Joey and Uncle Patrick exchanged a glance, then approached the ancient squirrel. "Show me your right paw, each of you." Joey and Patrick each held out their right paw. "Now," said Squirrelin, "do you give this paw willingly?" "Wait," said Joey, "that sounded familiar. What are you doing?" "He's changing you back," said Yasleen, like it wasn't a big deal at all. Squirrelin nodded. "You've been very helpful so far, no doubt, but this is low realm business. Your presence complicates matters, squagically speaking." "Won't we be a little cramped in here?" asked Uncle Patrick, looking around the room. Squirrelin scowled. "You'll find yourself in the park when you've transformed. Believe me, I've done this before." "This feels wrong," said Joey. "Can't we wait a little while? You said I was a hero, right?" Squirrelin's scowl deepened. "You've already been a hero. You've gotten your friends to safety. Now your journey is over. It is time for you to return to the High Realm. I will protect your friends from now on." "No, you won't. You'll destroy them," thought Joey. "You're Salaman." Joey could feel his friends and Uncle Patrick looking at him. What was he supposed to do? "Hurry," said Squirrelin. "I won't make this offer again." Joey and Uncle Patrick exchanged a glance. Patrick looked almost as unhappy as Joey felt, but he shrugged and said, "I came here to bring you back to your mom. This might be our only chance." "Go ahead, young one," said Sir Percifer. "This isn't your fight." "But it's okay, Joey," said Yasleen. "We can take care of ourselves. Get yourself to safety while you can." She smiled very bravely. Brutilda, standing beside Yasleen, nodded. Joey thought about Mom waiting for him at home. He really should go back to her, back to the apartment and school and signing up for Spanish class. He should go back to the rest of his life. Except every day he would think about the friends he had left here, and what kind of life would that be? Joey put his hand down. "Thank you, Squirrelin, but I think I'm needed here for the time being." Uncle Patrick said, "You sure, kid?" "I'm sure." Uncle Patrick smiled and lowered his hand. "Then I'm sure too." He winked at Joey. Percifer, Yasleen, and Brutilda, even Brutilda, were smiling also. It even looked like Brutilda might be crying a little, but Joey knew that wasn't possible. Squirrelin was not smiling. He was looking deeply at Joey, like he could probe his mind, and Joey had this sudden feeling that Squirrelin understood exactly why Joey was staying. "I see," said the Squigician. "In that case..." Two things happened at once. Squirrelin started to take a very deep breath, and Ratscalibur started to burn into Joey's side like the sun. Chapter 30. Ratscalibur had never burned like this before. Joey doubled over from the pain. Before he could even guess what was happening, Yasleen started chanting out loud this time, and waving her hands crazily in front of her face. As Squirrelin swelled bigger and bigger, her chanting got louder and louder. Joey could feel competing waves of power washing over him, but he was helpless to do anything about it. Joey wanted to scream, "What's going on?" but his whole body was frozen. He forced his eyes to turn toward Uncle Patrick and saw him gritting his teeth as he tried to move. He was a statue too. Smoky pink energy radiated out at them from Squirrelin, then was pushed back by warm yellow sunshine that seemed to come from Yasleen. The air smelled like electricity, like they were stuck inside a cloud in a thunderstorm, like lightning could strike at any second. And then it was over. Squirrelin let out his breath, but not in a big hiss like before. This time it was like a balloon deflating because the knot came untied. And Yasleen collapsed on the floor. Thump. Ratscalibur had gone instantly cool, and Joey was able to move now. What was that? Asked Uncle Patrick. Joey knew. He was trying to kill us. The princess stopped him. The little squidgition was bright red with fury. That insolent bit of fluff, he raged, to think that she could thwart me. Well, she only had one of those in her. Let's see her. Stop me now. He started to breathe in again, and Ratscalibur resumed burning. Joey put his hand on the sword, but before he could lift it, he was unable to move again. Joey strained with every muscle in his body, but it was no use. He was frozen, and Squirrelin was swelling bigger and bigger. This is the end. And then a loud, commanding voice rang out through the room. Squirrelin, desist! This has gone far enough! The voice sounded familiar, but Joey couldn't turn his head to see who it was. Squirrelin kept inflating, and the voice said again, Enough! Squirrelin seemed to hear it that time. Now only halfway inflated, he let out his breath with a sad sigh. Ratscalibur stopped burning, and Joey could move again. He turned his head to see who had saved him. Sir Aramis was standing in the doorway. The vizier looked completely unafraid, like this was a situation he faced every day. Brutilda, tend to your mistress, he commanded. The guinea pig was instantly kneeling by Yasleen's side, trying to make her comfortable. Aramis was staring sternly at Squirrelin. The squidgition was staring back with barely controlled rage. Who is that guy? Asked Uncle Patrick. Sir Aramis, vizier to King Uther, said Sir Percifer. There was not a hint of mockery in his voice. It is a great pleasure to see you, good sir. Thank you, said Aramis, though he kept his eyes firmly on Squirrelin. Yeah, said Joey, that was, really good timing. Aramis shrugged and walked a little ways into the room. Excellent timing, said Percifer. Then Percifer got a funny look on his face. In fact, it's particularly good timing. Percifer looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. Then he went ahead anyway. Forgive me for asking, but the princess sent her message to you a scant half-hour ago. No one has more faith in your abilities than I, but how did you get here so quickly? Oh, that, said Aramis, who finally turned to look at the white rat. Well, you see, he nodded to someone standing outside, I got a ride from some friends. After a pause, a sleek black head with a cruel black beak and dead black eyes poked through the door. It was a black claw. Chapter 31. The rest of the bird followed the head through the door, then straightened up and stretched its wings while making an ugly caw, caw, caw. Another crow, equally big and scary, came through the door. They were linked together at the legs by a harness. Percifer nodded. I feared as much. What's going on? Said Joey. I don't understand. Brutilda and Uncle Patrick looked just as confused as Joey did. Aramis had an expression on his face like he was kind of proud and kind of embarrassed. Percifer just looked disappointed. It's simple, really, said Percifer. Salaman isn't one villain. He's two. A powerful squidgition and a valiant knight. The mockery had returned to Percifer's voice, especially on the word valiant. Brutilda covered the princess protectively and looked up at Aramis, so angry she was shaking. Betrayer. Aramis seemed a little sad. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He, giggled Percifer, also a little sadly. How else could it have happened? Can I kill them now? Asked Squirrelin. Aramis shook his head. Let me try to reason with them. Aramis turned to Percifer. The plan was for Salaman to demand a new king for our realm. You, said Percifer. Me, Sir Aramis nodded. Salaman was going to say that Uther is cursed, and thus the kingdom is cursed, until I take the throne. The kingdom would be so desperate by that point that they'd agree. You know how loyal the peasants are to Uther. It was the only way I could get them to turn on him. You can't be king, said Brutilda. You're not of royal blood. No, I'm not, said Aramis, but my queen will be. He nodded to the slumbering Ysaline. When she's old enough, of course. Brutilda's silky hair bristled like porcupine spikes. Joey felt the same thing happening to the fur that ran down his back. Surely, said Sir Aramis, you realize that this is all for the best. Joey interrupted. Something had just occurred to him. When you saved Ysaline from the Black Claw, you just did that because you needed her alive so you could be king. Aramis nodded again. I felt a bit guilty about taking credit for the act of heroism. I was never in any real danger. It was all play acting and conversation when we were fighting. Actually, the Black Claw was supposed to be targeting you, but he stroked the nearest Black Claw's wing. Well, we don't love them for their brains. Why me? Said Joey. Because of what you represent. Gondorf was meant to be the king's last chance. His death was going to devastate the masses and make our whole plan possible. But then, Aramis looked at Joey with annoyance, but then there was a new hope. And you, said Parsifal, turning to Squirrelin, what did you get out of this? The little wizard seemed unashamed. Isn't it obvious? I get tribute from an entire kingdom in exchange for one little tin crown? Indeed, Aramis is raising a force that will bring me tribute from many kingdoms. It was not an offer I could refuse. But Gondorf, said Brutilda, like it was a curse, you are willing to murder your student, your friend, to satisfy your greed? Squirrelin shrugged. You can't grow a forest without bearing a few walnuts. A little defensively, he added, I'm getting older. I'm not as strong as I once was. In a few 100 years, I'll want to stop working. I have to start thinking about saving up for my retirement. Parsifal chuckled mirthlessly. Oh, my tiny friend, it appears that the Squadric has finally won the battle for what was left of your soul. A soul, said Squirrelin, is a luxury I cannot afford. I don't believe it, said Uncle Patrick. What? Said Joey. These guys are as bad as people. He shook his head. I'm never throwing popcorn to squirrels in the park again, I can tell you that. No, said Parsifal, giving Patrick a funny look. You probably aren't. He he he. Let's not be too hasty, said Sir Aramis. Why fight? Come to my side and help me reign over a new golden age. Surely you can understand my motivations. We have an ailing kingdom, suffering under the rule of a sick king whose heir is not yet old enough to rule. I did this not out of ambition. I did it for the good of the kingdom. Parsifal nodded. It's a plausible yarn, and yet... He looked at Joey. Well, hero, what do you think? Joey shook his head. It stinks. Why do you say that? Joey said, Because I'm starting to learn how these guys think. He gestured to Squirrelin. And I'm willing to bet the only reason King Uther is sick is that someone is using Squadric on him. Squirrelin's face crumpled like he'd been slapped, and Joey knew that his guess was right. And, said Joey, turning to Aramis, if Sir Aramis is really just a noble guy who's trying to save the realm, what's this force Squirrelin says he is collecting to conquer other kingdoms? From the look on Aramis's face, Joey knew that he was on the right track. I bet that he's the reason there are sewer rats above ground. Parsifal gasped in realization. Every emperor needs an army. Squirrelin looked at Aramis like he was asking permission for something. Aramis sighed, then nodded and said, Do what you must. Everyone but the girl. Instantly Ratscalibur burned like a branding iron in Joey's grip, and in a flash Joey knew what he had to do. Before the squidgician could even begin inflating, Joey poked him in the neck with the pointy end of the spork. He didn't even poke him very hard, just enough to leave 4 little holes in the paper-thin skin. Squirrelin started gulping air like before. His cheeks swelled a little, he gulped more, but now before he could inflate, the air was leaking out through the holes in the neck. Sssss. The tiny pink wizard grew scarlet with frustration. He kept trying to inhale faster and faster and faster, but still the air ran out. Sssss. Sir Aramis ran to his partner's side. What? He turned to Joey. What have you done? Marvelous, said Sir Parsifer, but I think it's time we left. Brutilda hoisted the princess onto her back and moved toward the exit. Don't even think it, screamed Aramis as he crouched by Squirrelin, frantically trying to plug holes. There's no escape. The park swarms with my underwhelmers. Even now, hundreds of them are climbing the rope to confront you. Then we will die fighting, said Brutilda as she started to draw her broadsword. But Uncle Patrick put a hand on her arm, stopping her. No, he said. I think I know a way out. Impossible. How? Patrick smiled. Let's just say I have some friends. Chapter 32. In the light of the full moon, the rope leading up to Squirrelin's lair looked like a thick vein, pulsing poison upward. But it wasn't poison, it was rats. Long, scabby, scarred sewer rats covered the rope in waves moving up, up, up. Some of them carried little spears in their mouths, but most had no weapons except for their teeth and claws. Blue and red-painted berserkers scrambled madly upward, clambering over the back of their brethren, kicking some of them off the rope in their haste to reach the top. No one stopped for the fallen rats. No one offered any help. A mangy gray brute was the first to reach the entrance hole, and he squeaked with triumph at having beaten the others. But his squeak turned to a squeal of confusion when a sleek black head with a cruel black beak and wild, panicked eyes poked its head out, quickly joined by another that looked even more frenzied. From inside the hole, behind the crows, voices yelled, "Yah! Go! Go!" With squawks of displeasure, the crows leaped from the hole and spread their wings. Hanging on to the harness that stretched between their legs were 4 rats and a guinea pig. "Go! Go!" shouted Joey, prodding the crow on the left with Ratscalibur. "Yah! Yah!" yelled Parsifer, prodding the crow on the right with his sword. Brutilda was between them, expertly knocking aside the crows' beaks with her broadsword whenever they craned their necks to try to peck at the pesky rats. Uncle Patrick sat next to her, carrying Yisleen on his back. "Go! Go! Yah! Yah!" The tied-together birds lifted herky-jerkily into the air like a drunken bat and flew crazily out of the park. When Patrick had prodded the crows down the exit tunnel, as Brutilda held Aramis at bay with her sword, it had been anyone's guess that they could fly with so many passengers riding on their harness. The answer appeared to be yes, but barely. The wild rats clinging to the rope watched them go with disappointment. One berserker turned sadly to another and asked, "Well, who are we going to kill now?" Up in the air, Joey thought he might end up getting killed anyway. There's a little seat in the middle of the harness that must have been for Aramis to sit in when the crows were carrying him. It probably would have been very comfortable for Aramis, 1 rat carried by 2 big crows, but now the crows were carrying 5 rodents. 2 of the rodents were enormous, and 2 of the rodents were stabbing the crows in the butt with swords. This was not a comfortable ride. "I feel like a flea in a hurricane," moaned Brutilda. The crows were trying with all their might to shake off their unruly passengers. "Can't hold on much longer," said Uncle Patrick, who was holding Yisleen with one arm and holding on to the harness with the other. He was having the hardest time of any of them, but, of course, it had been his idea to borrow Sir Aramis's friends. "Just a little bit more," said Parsifer. "Let us find a nice place to land." It was impossible to steer the crows, but they had at least flown out of the park, and now the bright lights of the city jiggled beneath them. The flight was so bouncy and disjointed it was impossible to actually know where in the city they were, but they just needed to see the one right thing. "Now?" asked Joey on a rooftop, suddenly appeared only a few feet beneath them. "Now!" shouted Parsifer. They each swung their swords and sliced through the strings, tying the harness to the crow's feet. Suddenly they were falling, but it was only a couple of feet down to a nice soft tar on an apartment building's roof. The black claws, suddenly free, cawed with relief and climbed into the night sky. "Is everyone all right?" asked Joey. Everyone nodded. No one seemed to be suffering from anything worse than a few bumps and scratches. "And Yisleen," said Joey, "is she okay?" He tilted the princess's head to see if she was still breathing. Yisleen made an annoyed sound, said, "5 more minutes," and started snoring again. "So brave," said Brutilda with admiration. "She's not brave," said Uncle Patrick. "She's in a coma. Brunhilde glared at him. Parsifal was making plans already. Our first order of business must be to get home and warn the kingdom. I highly doubt that Aramis will give up his dreams of conquest now. I know where we are, said Joey, staring at the roof. Eh? Said Parsifal. Where we are is unimportant. All we need to do is sniff, and that will tell us where we need to go. Where we are is important to me, said Joey. He turned to face the others. And if I'm a hero, then it must be fate. He pointed to the building across the street. That's where I live with my mother. Chapter 33. Mom sat on the couch. On the table next to her were the apartment's landline, her cell phone, and a cold cup of coffee. Her eyes were red from crying. Streaks of gray hair had appeared in her red curls overnight. She looked like she had lost 10 pounds in the 2 days Joey and Patrick had been gone. 2 days. Was it really only 2 days? The police had come by earlier, but they were only being polite. They had no clues at all. Patrick hadn't been to his apartment or used his credit cards. No one in the city had reported seeing a big man or a little boy with a gray streak in his hair. And she couldn't bring herself to tell them about the message in the dust, the one that was written in Patrick's handwriting. She must be going insane. We're still hopeful, the police had said, but she could tell they really weren't. It was like they were telling her without actually saying, this is a big city. People go missing all the time. Could they really be gone? Forever? Mom didn't know what she'd do. How could she go on living without her family? How could she go on without even knowing what had happened to them? All she could do now was sit and wait and wait. They had to come back. They had to come back. Chapter 34. Joey and Patrick stood on top of the garbage can outside Mom's window peering in. They didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, Uncle Patrick cleared his throat and said, "She's always been so strong." Joey knew what he meant. It just seemed impossible to believe that Mom could be so sad. "Do you think I made the right choice?" he asked, when Squirrelin said he could change us. "I think you made the only choice you could." Joey wished he could believe that was true. "We must go," said Brunhilde, who was standing guard over Yisleen on the sidewalk next to the garbage can. "Do try to be a bit less abrupt, O spherical one," said Sir Parsifal, who was standing next to her. Then, apologetically, he said, "But she's right. We have to hasten back to Uther's court, and we have no cats to carry us. The princess will slow us down as well." They tried to wake her up, but it was hopeless. Patrick called down to them. "1 more minute." "1 more," replied Parsifal. Joey was still staring at Mom. "Maybe I could try to go in and talk to her. Maybe she could help us." Patrick sighed. "She'd just think she's going crazy. You don't want to put that on her too, do you?" Joey shook his head. "Look," said Uncle Patrick, "maybe if we live through all of this, we can find another agician, like a dogician, a crocodile-ician, a nuclear fission, whatever, who can change us back." Joey nodded. "At the very least, we can write her a letter, make up some excuse about where we've gone. Maybe she wouldn't feel so bad then. What would we say?" Uncle Patrick shrugged. "We'll think of something. Let's just worry about staying alive first." "That's a more immediate worry than you might think," said Parsifal softly. Joey looked down at Parsifal, who was staring up at the sky. Joey suddenly realized that the wind had picked up recently. He could hear it blowing softly in the distance. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And Ratscalibur was warming up against his hip. He looked up and saw that Parsifal was looking at. "How did they find us?" asked Joey. Parsifal giggled. "They have noses, don't they?" The moon hung huge and white in the sky, like a paper lantern at a carnival. Silhouetted against it were hundreds and hundreds of crows. They were tiny now, but they were getting bigger as they flew closer and closer and closer, and each of them was carrying something long and lean in its claws. A rat. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Keep an eye out for the next video. Bye!